then we have to start. So welcome everybody to the seminar, which is a part of seminar series on contested heritage, memory, and identity practices in Eastern European and global contexts. Firstly, I would like to inform you that this seminar is being recorded, and the recording will be uploaded on Vilniaus University Faculty of Communication YouTube channel after a week or so. During the talk, I would kindly ask you to follow a few rules just for us to have a nice and comfortable lecture and discussion. So firstly, I kindly ask you to keep your microphones muted during the presentation. You can ask questions on the meeting chart or live after the presentation. And let's respect each other and do not interrupt the speaker. Today we are presenting Dr. Kathrin Pabst, which is a German ethnologist, researcher, author, and speaker. Also the head of the scientific department at the Vest-Agder Museum in Kristiansand in Norway. Kathrin is also a leader of another large-scale European Union co-funded project, which is called Identity on the Line. And the project works with the long-term consequences of migration and intergenerational transfer of trauma. So today, Kathrin will present us Norwegian research on long-term consequences and repercussions of the World War II within the families. Before Kathrin starts, I would like to ask Kostas Dallas to say a few words about the project in the framework of which this seminar is being held. Kostas, please.
Thank you, Donata. And I won't really take long. One reason is that I'm really very, very much impatient to hear Kathrin's talk today, because the topic and her research in the Identity on the Line project is so relevant directly to the interests and to the concerns of our project, Connective Digital Memory in the Borderlands, in which I have the honor of joining a team of researchers from the Faculty of Communication of Vilniaus University. Our interests are very much to see how memories, especially of the difficult past and the contested past, come to shape and affect contemporary identity making. And when I say identity making, I mean the different and multiple identities that people have, from the subnational, ethno-linguistic, or even subalternate identities in some cases, to national identities, to transnational identities as well. And there is no more relevant time for such an investigation as also to think about and reflect on the issues that Kathrin is going to will be sharing with us today, than this moment when we see how relevant the way in which we construct in our minds and in our semiotic practices, in our symbolic practices, ideas about the past, ideas about who we are and who are others, into contemporary life and contemporary public life as well. Than these days. We know that, and as we all follow with great concern the developments in Ukraine, clearly, we can't take this out of our mind today. We've been all glued on our TV sets and on the internet looking at that. But for a moment, and I think for this afternoon, I would like also to invite us all to step back one step and to consider what are the ways in which ideas of the past and memories of the past are important for our ideas of today, because this is really an important dimension to consider if we are to become better citizens and better inhabitants of this difficult the difficult continent of ours, Europe. So thank you so much, Kathrin, for being with us, and I hope to see you all in further seminars of this seminar series that is coordinated by my colleague Donata Amarkauskaitė. And so the floor is yours, Kathrin. We're all sort of waiting very, very much to benefit from your talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me and for this perfect introduction, which could not have been better. Normally, this presentation starts with a blue background. I have had it once before. Today it's black. And the reason is, of course, what is happening in the Ukraine right now. This picture was taken at 11 o'clock this morning. And of course, there might have been changes since then. And for me and for us, and of course, we are not alone. And we just have heard there are many people working with the long-term consequences of wars, or what it means for one's identity. We know now already that what we see today will have consequences for the generations to come, not only personal consequences for the people in the Ukraine as we speak. And that is really terrible to think about. But as we also heard, I'm going to step back one step now and present to you a project which is going on right now still, but we have finished a big part of the process, and I will tell you a little bit more about the long-term consequences of the Second World War in Norway, actually. I myself am a German. This has nothing to do with this case, but in Norway it was the Germans who came and occupied the country for 5 years. And even that is still a very big thing in Norway. So I will come back to that. Before I do so, I would like to the Norwegian project, which I'm going to talk about today, into a bigger context, which Donata was mentioning already. The Norwegian project is one project within a larger international project called Identity on the Line, which works actually with migration. And to make it very short, I won't use much time for this. Identity on the Line is a large-scale cooperation project between 6 cultural history museums and 1 university, being the University of Vilniaus. And together we are exploring the long-term consequences of 7 migration processes which have taken place in Europe over the course of the last 100 years. And to say it very simply, and 50 years from now, what is happening in the Ukraine right now could be a case of such a project, unfortunately. So we want to know what happens when the time witnesses are not able to talk about what has happened, or they are able to talk about what has happened, but couldn't provide enough answers to their kids and grandchildren. Maybe they had to flee, maybe they had to move. What does it mean for the kids and grandchildren of the migrants? And what does it mean to the family relations and to the identity feeling of all of the 3 generations that they were mainly forced to migrate? This is an international project which lasts for 4 years. So we are not done, but we have come quite far. And it's co-funded by Creative Europe with quite a lot of money. We have a total budget of 2.5 million euros. I don't want to use time with the main activities, but we are producing exhibitions, movies, school packages for children, and all of these kind of material you can find on the web pages, on our web pages, and it's free available for everyone who wants. 7 countries participate in the project. We have Norway, which I will talk more about in a minute, the long-term consequences of the German occupation. We have Denmark, the long-term consequences of migration from Greenland to Denmark. We have Sweden, which is concentrating on forced migration of the Sami population from the north to the south of Sweden. We have Poland, which works with the Second World War and the long-term consequences of the exchange in former German Pomerania. We have Lithuania, as you might know, or maybe not. The University of Vilniaus works with the long-term consequences of the Holocaust for Lithuanian women, one of the toughest parts of our project. Slovenia and Croatia are both working with the War of the Balkan and the Second World War on the Balkan. So these are our 7 projects, and I will only focus on one project today, and this is the Norwegian project. Just before I start, one similarity, or give you an overview what we have collected. In sum, all the partners in this project have collected 164 in-depth interviews. Some of these interviews lasted for 2 hours, some lasted for 15 hours. As you can imagine, we have a very comprehensive material. We have audio recordings, we have video recordings, we have texts, we have photos, we have objects. We have such a big material that it will take some time to analyze it. But I hope we will get some interesting answers to some of the questions which also were mentioned in the introduction. So I'm really looking forward to it, to digging a little bit deeper into this. Before I really start with the Norwegian and actually playing a short movie to you, for all of you, about the background for the Norwegian project, I just want to give you a first overview about findings which are not analyzed yet, but which have become very clear when looking at all 164 interviews from all 7 European countries. So we see that all 3 generations, the time witnesses, their children and their grandchildren, there are ongoing attempts to find your own identity between polarities, which we have defined as home and away, belonging and alienation, silence and openness, resilience, vulnerability, and injustice and reconciliation. And all of these polarities were important for our informants, all of them. But some of them were here on the scale, but there on the other scale. So it were some differences here. I will focus a lot today about silence and openness, because this was very crucial for the Norwegian sub-project, which I now will start with. So I'm quiet now, please, background.
Kathrin, we don't really hear what the women is saying. So could you?
Oh, you can't hear the lady?
No.
Oh,
could
okay,
you
then
make it a little bit louder, maybe?
No, I don't think that works. So I think I'm very sorry for the confusion. So I was listening to her and I will tell you now what she said. Can you see this advertisement now? Okay. So I will just sum up what the Norwegian film says. We will publish it soon for those of you who are interested. So for Norway, between 1940 and 1945, 500,000 German soldiers were sent to Norway and occupied a very peaceful country, which had a population of 3 million people. So one of 6 was a German soldier for 5 years. And the German soldiers were, some of them were kind young men which fall in love with the Norwegian girls. 12,000 kids, approximately 8,000 to 12,000 kids were born. They hired some Norwegians to help them to build ways and streets and military goals or military bunkers, all this kind of stuff. But of course, they were also torturers. They punished very hard those who didn't work together with them. And of course, they were the occupants. They did terrible things. They burned down half of Norway or the north of Norway in the end of the Second World War. And they left 5 years later a population where the local societies and the politicians punished everyone who had collaborated with the Germans during this 5 years in a very hard way. Meaning, for example, that the girls who often young girls, young women who had fallen in love with the soldiers, who often were polite young men and maybe even married them, they got their hair shaved, they were excluded from the local societies, they were not allowed to fulfill their education. The kids, many of the kids were placed in special care child institutions, punished partly all their life. And those who had worked for the Germans, nobody knew how long the Germans would be there. Many of those who had worked for the Germans would never talk about it and would still, until today, keep quiet about every kind of collaboration with the Germans. Many were members of the Nazi party. simply because they thought they would have some kind of advantages, not big advantages, but small advantages. And even they who didn't do anything bad, they were not, there were no trial, they were not chased after the war for doing something bad, but until now, nobody would talk about it. So the war is still really present in Norway, and it is 20 years ago when I came to Norway, there were people who didn't want to talk to me because I'm a German myself. So that has changed, but still the war has long-time consequences. This is what we wanted to address in the Norwegian project, and we actually had a news announcement in the local newspapers and social media. I will translate for you, but we asked publicly, is there anyone here who still has, who still senses that in their family was something from the Second World War, which is important for their parents and grandparents or themselves, but nobody would talk about it? Is there somebody here which still feels the war affects their lives and identities without being able to address it? That was our question. And the result were 31 people who contacted us. Almost all of them wanted to be anonymous. What you see here is a publication which we produced after the work. I will talk a little bit more about that. Of the 31 people, only 21 allowed us to use their story. I will come back to the reasons, but to sum it in detail, but to sum it very shortly up, many of those people are still today not able to talk about what has happened because it simply had been too tough within the families and for themselves. So what we did in the process, we had a working group of 5 museum employees who met the informants. The informants were promised, of course, that they could be anonymous, and they had to sign a letter of consent that we use their story, the last version of a story which they had said yes to. And the museum employees who met them wrote their story for them, meaning that if I would have been one of those who interview our informants, the informants would tell their story to me, and I would summarize it and send it back to the informants saying something like, I was born in 1938. When I was 6, my father, and so on and so on. And what we saw is that some of the people withdraw from the project after reading their story black on white, black on paper. They said to us, you got the story right. This is what I said. This is the truth. But when I read my own story, written, not only in my head, but I saw it on paper, this was so tough for me that I can't be a part of this anymore. One said directly, I need a psychologist and you have to get it to me. I will come back to that, and I will also give you some examples. Before I do so, I just want to give you an impression what we did with this material until now. One thing is the joint activities in the international project, the movie, the digital exhibition, joint exhibitioning, travel through Europe. But the other thing is that we have an exhibition, traveling exhibition in the southern Norway, which opened 2 weeks ago. And our goal with this traveling exhibition was to get our visitors to understand the feelings of the people. As everyone, almost everyone wanted to be anonymous, we had to use actors to read their stories, read quotes from their stories, what they had told us in the interviews, and produce movies, small movie clips and audio recordings. And these audio recordings and movies and quotes we present in the exhibition. So here you see, for example, one visitor who can listen to a story, can choose a story, listen to the story. It's not the informant, it's only an actor, because the informant is so afraid until today to be recognized as the child of someone who supported the German, as a child of a German soldier, something like that. We had movies, and you see also in the movies, this were only actors, but even the actors were produced or were shown in a way that it's difficult to, you understand that this is still difficult to talk about. And we have also collected objects which you can look at, and the objects are of course followed by why is this object still important for you after that time. I want to give you some examples that you understand why it was so sensible. This is starting easy, but it's not easy. Starting with a quote, I just have to get the video away here, otherwise I see myself or you while I want to talk. I see something in the chat, but I can't read the chat now. So Donata, you have to stop me if I'm not heard. So this child of a German soldier said, "From my early childhood, I was instructed not to tell anyone that I came from Germany. In the aftermath of the war, I understood that these cover stories were good for me. I had friends who didn't have such cover stories and who ended their lives as adults, shooting themselves because they couldn't cope with it anymore." Meaning that this man was lucky to have a family who knew that nobody was allowed to know that he was a kid of a German soldier. They supported him. The local society directly around him supported him and accepted that his mother just had fallen in love with a soldier. But for many other kids, it was not the same, and they were assaulted. They were treated badly. As I said, they were placed in child care homes, and they were really excluded from the local societies just for being kids of a German soldier. Okay, let me see. Let's go on. This story, you will get the quote soon, is one of them who shows how behavior, as we see it, behavior could be a result, especially poor anger management, could have been a result of people not being able to cope what has happened under the war. This is a lady, she is my age, therefore it touched me especially. She said, "My father was very abusive. We were punished and hit almost every day. And the only place where I was safe, where I could escape, was my grandfather. I was extremely fond of my grandfather, so there I was safe. It was the father of my father, and when my father was violent, I could escape to my grandfather. I loved him so much that I used my money, my saving monies, to get him to the continent, to Germany one time, because he said he had never left Norway." And then she said, when he was dead, my father was dead, long time afterwards, I heard a radio announcement that the Norwegians would open a special kind of archive. It's a kind of archive for all the people who have supported the Germans and were convicted, no, who were in court for helping the Germans, where the material, the archive material, was published now. And if you had any questions, you were allowed to call them. And she said, "I had no idea why, but something in myself, something in me told me that I should contact them." And she did, and she got 200 pages of material about her grandfather, who, as he had told her, never had been outside of Norway, who had supported the Germans in a way that he went to prison after the Second World War. And when he came out, he was so abusive to his own son, who then was the father of our informant, that our informant thought that this brutality was actually a reason because the grandfather started it, the same grandfather who later saved her. It was a terrible shock to me when his wartime history was unveiled. Working my way through all this material has been an emotional roller coaster for me, an experience which I feel has had a lot of influence on my own life. All the suffering from the past gave my father a painful adolescence, which in turn gave me a painful adolescence, which has now taken me several years of therapy to attempt to come to terms with. I want to also give you an example of a son of a guy who actively fought against the Germans. And he did so for several years. But when the war ended, this man who risked his life to fight the Germans was so afraid of everything. He was so destroyed after 5 years with being in constant being afraid constantly that somebody would find out what he was doing, that his son had to take care of him quite early as a small boy. And the son, now an adult, 67, says, "My childhood was perhaps a little different from most, and I soon became aware of who my father really was. How lucky you are," many said. They did not know how hard it was at home. A member of our family once quoted my father as saying, "The price peace has cost us is a price our descendants will have to pay in the form of fear and unrest, passed on from generation to generation. There is no doubt he was right in this observation. Interesting enough, we were contacted by a German woman. Of course, I didn't know her. And she said, my father was a German soldier in Norway. And when he came back to Germany, he was so traumatized that we 4 German children in Germany were traumatized as well. I come back to her background. She says, something happened in Norway during the war, something terrible that was going to leave its mark on my father more than anything else. Something so strong that he was never willing to talk about it. Something that traumatized him so profoundly that it affected our entire family, even us 4 siblings who have never experienced war. In this way, the war somehow became part of our lives too. They never found out what it was that traumatized her father, but we know today that the Norwegian soldiers, for several years, they had close connection with the local societies in some areas of Norway. And in the end of the war, they were forced to burn down parts of northern Norway. And our informant thinks that her father, who took more than 700 pictures of the people, of the nature, of everything, had to burn down the houses and the places of the people he had fallen in love with, and that he never came over it. So in southern Germany today, you can find this cabin. It's built after Norwegian construction modes. And this was the only place in Germany where the father, the former soldier in Norway, could relax a little bit and smile. So our informant was clear that she said, the war has become a part of us because of what has happened in Norway. I want to conclude with giving you an example about the generations, 3 generations. We have talked to 3 generations of people who were affected by the Second World War. And I would like to just point your attention to how the stories of the generations are connected to each other. The first who contacted us was a woman, 62, and she told me, I have always been alone. I had always had the feeling that there was something which I was a part of. Everyone knew and it's something, but I didn't know. And in my family, it was never possible to talk about feelings. My mother, which I love deeply, was never able to talk about feelings. It felt like she had cut off all feelings and I never got through to her. So I have been lonely all my life. She says, now I can't read it, but I hope you get the beginning. There was so much under the surface, but nobody touched this. Silence was everywhere. Later, she found out what I'm going to read to you now. If I look back at my life until the present day, I think that the event itself, which she got to know eventually, that my mother had married a German and that my brother was only my half-brother, has been of minor importance. That was something which in a way had nothing to do with me. But the fact that I was not allowed to know while all others knew, and that there was no room for talking, that is something which has really marked me. Since it was so painful to feel different, I have chosen the opposite for my family and my children. I talk to them about everything, and we have a very close relationship. Why is this an important quote? Several reasons. First reason, I was the informant with whom I talked to actually myself, talked about loneliness, which she felt but didn't understand. She said, I grew up for 20 years in a house where no one would talk about feelings. Not my father, not my mother, no one. And I didn't understand it. When I was 20, I was in the town, in our little town, and I got to know from a drunk guy that my mother had been married to a German soldier and that my brother was only my half-brother. Everyone had known in the town where I went to school, where I grew up. Everyone in the local society had known what my mother had done, and everyone was told not to talk about it. So everyone knew something which was related to my identity, but I never got to know it. And that was the worst thing of everything, that everyone know, not me. And I just want also to mention the last aspect here. She did it different with her kids, and I come back to why that was important. Interesting enough, after this lady, I talked to her mother. A 94-year-old lady, the most fantastic lady I have met for a long, long time. And she told me the most amazing and beautiful love story which I have ever heard. She said, I was 16 years old when I fall in love with a German soldier during World War II. I was thrown out of the house of my parents. I had to leave my family. We married when I was 17 or 18. I was sent to Germany because I was no longer allowed to stay to Norway. We got a little child. Germany was totally destroyed of the bombs and of the war. We had nothing to eat. It was cold, but we were together. My German husband and I, we were together with our son, and we were so much in love, we didn't care for anything. But then the little one got sick and there was no food in Germany. There was nothing we could do to save his life. The only thing I could do is go back to Norway and to beg my parents to take us in, that I get enough food for my kid. To do so, I had to divorce my German husband. Otherwise, I was not allowed to get back to Norway. So the two of them arranged that she would get back after the war, and she traveled to Norway and was allowed to work as a house cleaner for her parents. The whole local society, nobody would talk to her. And she said, after a while, I could not go back. My mother convinced me that my son would die if I go back to Germany. So I had to stay in Norway, and married some other guy, which I got children with. But my feelings have been in Germany all my life. And I had to shut down all my feelings to be able to cope with a new situation, because my loved husband was in Germany and I could never go back. So I had to shut off my feelings to be able to cope. And it was these feelings which the daughter had felt. So she said, I can't read the first sentence because there is something in my way. But then she said, who could that be? Who could I talk to in the little village where everybody knew what I had done? I have worked hard in all these years to ensure that we could have a family life where everybody was in good care. I have been forced to shut in parts of myself down to achieve that. I have thought a lot about the choices I have made over the years, and I know that I have never been a German tramp. I was a Norwegian woman who fell in love with a German, and he loved me. There is nothing wrong in that, and we did not do anything any harm. He was the love of my life, and even today I speak with him. I have done so all since I left him. So the 94-year-old lady which I met told me that she is talking, now he's dead, but she's talking this day with her dead German ex-husband every day. And in this little box which you see, which was found after his death in Germany, after the two of them haven't seen each other for 60 years, they found all letters, all photographs, everything they have shared in the short years of their marriage. And he had kept it as a treasure all his life, and asked his son shortly before he died to take care of it. So the last in this line is, of course, the youngest one, the last in the generation. And she said, 30 years old, 33 years old, daughter of my first informant. And again, I can't read what it's the first sentence here, but then she said, I know that all of this has done something to my mother. In our home, there has always been a lot of openness, and I think her adolescence has made her decide she would do it differently with us. In that way, my mother has managed to stop the negative consequences of the suppression. I also hope I have inherited a bit of my grandmother's strength. I'm very proud of her that she decided to make her own choices and had the guts to hold out onto them. It inspires respect to hold out over such a long period of time and to suppress one's own feeling for a nobler purpose, in this case, to save the life of the son. Okay, summing up, because we have to move on, otherwise the time is running. What were our experiences during the interviews? So, as I said already, of the 23 informants who contacted us in the beginning, 10 have withdrawn after reading their stories, or being even more aware of how much what this has done to them and their families over the last 75 years. Actually, there were also some informants, 3, who were not very much affected. And the point with their stories is to show that if the local societies actually accepted what has happened, the effect on the individuals was really, really very limited. But the local societies and the punishment of the authorities, that was such an extra struggle which the informants had to relate to, that was maybe the worst. When I said that this project was a lot about silence and openness, we saw very clearly here that what the kids and grandchildren struggled most with was not knowing what has happened. Sometimes, as I shown, the local society knew, but you felt all the time there was something which has traumatized your father. There was something what has happened. There was something here which you can sense, but nobody talks about it. And you can't go on with building your own identity, finding your own story, deciding who you are if you don't know what this something under the surface is. So this silence and openness was really huge aspects here. I don't think I want to talk too much about what it did to us museum employees, but I think I can say also for my colleagues from Lithuania and all other colleagues that it was extremely demanding for us to talk to the informants, which have done, of course, the greatest job, because they sometimes for the first time shared their stories with us. And they were so personal stories that most of them cried when talking to us. But also to us, it was really so tough to meet the informants, because we were so afraid to re-traumatize them when asking about the tough question: what happens during the war, what happened in the concentration camps, what happened afterwards, how were you treated? We were afraid to re-traumatize, so we connected with psychologists who helped us to work through this. And some of our colleagues had to take a little time out because it was just too tough to hear how this long-term consequences, what they led to. Okay, I want to sum up some of the findings which we are now going to analyze in scientific articles, starting with that soon. We had a hypothesis provided by some psychologists saying that secrets are always more dangerous than stories, because of course you ask yourself, should you talk about this, or should you just leave it where it is? Should you just leave the stories from the past where they belong in the past, as some would say? Don't touch it, don't talk about it, don't re-traumatize. But actually, we learned very, very clearly that secrets are always more dangerous than stories. It is important to talk. There is a lot of scientific evidence, which I unfortunately am not able to talk to right now in this short time. A lot of scientific evidence saying it's good for the informants to talk if done in the right way. It is essential for their kids and grandchildren to get a certain amount of information to work on their own identity. And it is important for the people in the societies who might have experienced something of the same, but are not able to talk about it, are not able to share their story, not with the museum, not with anyone. But if they see that somebody else has experienced the same and starts to talk about it, they also, after a while, will start talking, and hopefully the societies get more open, get the secrets or the not told events up from the surface and or on the surface, and finally address them in a proper way. So first findings indicate that transgenerational transfer happens between the generations, regardless the fact if one knows what has happened. I come back to that. How secrets are handled is crucial for the family relations. So if you always sense that something is there, but nobody talks about it, it disturbs your relation to your families. And of course, the members of the same family could react differently. A brother could really have a lot of problems to find his own identity, while a sister could live with not knowing much. So there are, of course, differences. Trauma is very important. I will come back to that, and the local societies. I just want to mention it, that we are starting a new research project now because of these findings. We are also collaborating with the University of Vilniaus about the question, what happens to the untold? So we want to know, if you don't know what has happened, you only can sense it. What does it do to you? How does the untold, the unspoken is transferred from generation to generation? And what does it mean for our joint perception of history and also the dissemination of our joint history? I don't want to use much time on this one, just mentioning that we have seen again in the project, we project participants, partners in the project, that working with sensitive topics which are identity related, they always, of course, demand a lot of ethical discussions and considerations. And we have continuously discussed among ourselves how to approach our informants, how to go forward, which questions to ask, in which order we have to ask the questions. Because, of course, we can't end the interview with saying, this must have been so depressing. How did you survive? Of course, we were thinking about how could you end the interview by also asking, is there anything positive which came out of this situation? And in many cases it was, because you get actually also stronger of everything which has happened. And it's important to get the resilience, which is also transferred from generation to generation, to get it out in the open and say, yes, you have been a migrant and your parents maybe, or your father have been in the Holocaust, but he survived, you survived, and you coped with the situation, even if it was very, very tough. So it's always important to have both aspects. I could say much, but I think I won't do it now, about how we also have to think about our visitors. There is a possibility that our visitors in the exhibitions react very strongly to information, and the reactions are not in line with what you would expect of reactions if you see pictures or learn about a part of our joint history. And it is simply because they might not been aware of their own family stories and their own underlying family issues, and only when they see it in an exhibition, they suddenly, something in them click and put things together, and they could react negatively on exhibitions in a very strong way, and the museum curators have to be prepared for that. I don't want to talk too much about that, because I want to end with talking a little bit about trauma. And the reason is that I want to focus on this here, that many of the people in the Norwegian project, and I know also in the Lithuanian project, have clear signs of trauma. The stories are related to traumatic experiences. Because of that, we have talked to a lot of psychologists, or some psychologists, not only collaborated, but also interviewed them. And in general, you can say that a trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical, and longer-term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and physical symptoms. So why am I saying that? I'm saying this because trauma, almost every one of us will experience one kind of trauma in their life. War and migration, forced migration, is these are situations where you have a lot of traumas over a short period of time. And of course, everyone who have experienced war or forced migration very closely might be traumatized. Not all people who are traumatized develop clinical symptoms. It's approximately 1/3 of the people who experience a trauma who are traumatized in a medical way. But at least 1/3 more has somehow some kind of reaction in their life. They react differently towards their kids, to their grandchildren. Of course, they react differently to their surroundings, because a trauma does something with you, even if you cannot remember it. For example, kids who experienced the war who were too small to remember something consciously, their body remembers. So it is stored in your body and affects your life on some level or another, always. Okay, so it's very important to have in the back of our minds, if we talk to informants who have experienced something like that, that this trauma might have been transferred between the generations. And for now, we know that there are 3 ways that a trauma could be transferred from one generation to the next. And these knowledge is from working fields as psychology, neuroscience, and a quite new working field called epigenetics, for those of you who haven't heard about it. I come back to what this means. So the first way, it's related to behavior. Let's say a woman has experienced something very traumatic, something she cannot or does not want to talk about. What we know for sure is that her children can sense that something is wrong because of her behavior. This is obvious, and all of you know it, that even if your mother doesn't say to her daughter, never go out in the dark, or she could say, keep away from all men, and it doesn't make sense somehow in the normal daily life, there could be some reason for that. You sense something is there, but she wouldn't tell what it is. The second, I don't have a quote from a psychologist, but this is the time where you are in the womb of your mother, the second picture here in the middle. There are studies from the Netherlands, from the period, the two first winters after the Second World War, which were very cold, there were very little food. And the mothers who were pregnant during that period, where they were very hungry, where many people died because there was not enough food, they got not only children, which were smaller and more stressed than other children, but also the children's children and the children's children's children. They had signs of being underweight, being more stressed. So you could see that something was happening. The third aspect is a little bit discussed, but there have been a lot of studies actually about the Holocaust victims the last years, especially from Israel. Lerner and Yehuda are two of the people who have worked most with this, which I'm not a biologist, so I read the quote first. In addition, we know that the intense stress a mother, now I'm, for example, in a concentration camp, experienced then and there, the feeling of being terrified might have resulted in the attachment of a kind of marker to her genes, a marker that assures that the body remembers the stress and which patterns of reaction she chooses unconsciously. This marker can follow the genetic material of her children and grandchildren. This is how they are programmed already before being born, for example, through the general message, watch out, be careful, the world is a dangerous place, get ready to defend yourself. So to be a little bit more concrete, to mention some of the studies done in Israel, they looked at Holocaust victims and they saw, as all of you know, we are born with the genetic material, we die with the same genetic material. But in the moment of a trauma, in the moment where something so serious happens that it affects that you're terrified to die, there could be a kind of, this could be so intense that there could be a kind of marker which is installed in your body, which reminds your body that there has been such a stress and reminds your body of your reaction, your stress reaction. Meaning, and this marker, the researchers found in the children and grandchildren, meaning that a grandchild, for example, has kind of marker reminding her or him in a very stressful situation, this is your reaction, and you go in a total situation where you're so much afraid of what is happening. So your whole body is going in a survivor modus. So the grandchildren, they could have this marker, which is only in the body somehow. But when the grandchild itself experiences something, which is somehow similar to what the grandmother has or grandfather has experienced, this marker could come alive, could be activated, and the stress reaction is much stronger in the grandchild than it would have been if there would not have been the history of stress and survival and trauma in the family. I have to apologize for me not being a biologist. I'm going to round off now. So, if done rightly, we believe that work with these kind of topics, taboo-related topics, silence topics, trauma transfer, done by museum professionals, which have to get and collaborate with psychologists and other fields of studies to be really good enough prepared, could be beneficial for on 4 levels at least, the individuals and their families, people who have experienced the same, for example, also visitors, society as such, and our common history understanding. If we start with the first, for the individual, there are many theories which I can't quote now, but being heard and included, respected for the story one has experiences is very important for people. It's important for family relations that one talks about what has happened and you know what your parents and grandparents has experienced. And as I said already, secrets are always more dangerous than stories. People who have experienced the same, for example, visitors, and who now find their stories in museums, in movies, and so on, they feel less alone. Sometimes they thought they were totally alone with everything which has happened and now learn they haven't been. Society as such, I believe, we believe, a theory says, everything of all these kind of three things is that as long as there are secrets under the surface which are affecting many, many people in a society, groups of people, but you are not allowed to talk about it, you are not allowed to discuss it, it's not able to get it out in the open, it will always do something to the relations within the societies, minorities versus majorities, fights suddenly can occur. I could say very much about that, but just for now, as you can see, there are a lot of philosophers who also work with this. I leave it with this now, but it's very important for societies to talk about these kind of aspects. And of course, our common history understanding says that museums have the responsibility to present true image of our joint history. Most important prerequisites, of course, respect, trust and knowledge, ethical considerations. Follow us if you think it's interesting. And the conference, a conference about the unspoken, presenting 6 experts on trauma transfer, will take place in March. It's free for everyone to sign up. It's 2 days. Join us if you think this is interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kathrin. That was really interesting. It was sometimes it was quite tough to read those quotes which you showed in your presentation, because all the part of Europe which had to deal with the World War II has something similar in their history. And I believe that maybe people who are here would like to ask a question or have some remarks for the Kathrin, which they would like to share. You can raise your hand if you want to. But since someone will think of the question, I have the first one for you, and I would like to start with the children of the German soldiers. Can there be a general position, like generalization of the identities of those people who are children of German soldiers? Is it possible to define their identity? Is it somehow different from other people, or do they consider themselves as Norwegians or Germans or impure Norwegians or something like that? Because usually people in those situations, they feel quite stressed, and they don't know how to identify themselves. Have you done some research, or maybe have you noticed something from the interviews with the people?
I can start with saying that there is no homogeneous group. So it's not like you have a kind of interest group of all the children of German soldiers or something like that. So these are individuals who try to make sense of it on their alone. And some of them try to find out who was their father. They got in touch with the German families. So they try to cope this way. Some of them were so harmed by the reactions of the local societies, mainly, or that they were placed in child care institutions, that they didn't want to have anything more to do with it. We talked also to someone who said, we found out that my foster brother, it was German, the son of a German soldier, his father was a torturist. What do you do if you get to know that your father was a German torturist, one of them who tortured people in Norway, who did terrible things? Should you tell your foster brother who his father was, or should you leave it? So I can't answer your question actually directly, because there are no patterns as far as we can see between the people. We can only say something was important for the process. For some, it was very important to know. It was very important to know that the local society played a big role. But then some wanted to know who their fathers was. Some didn't. Some regret that they tried to find out. Some are still searching for answers. But I think here's a gray zone, because many won't talk about it. So we have only at the top of the iceberg.
Okay, and if we will take this broader view, is there a common historical narrative, as you said, common history? Yes, is there a historical narrative which is like the only one in Norway regarding those occupation period, or do people see different angles of the same period and can discuss about it like openly?
Yeah, the new research project, which we now will start, is actually addressing something where there is no differentiation, as you say. And this is, who were the NS sympathizants? So who were the people in Norway who supported the Nazis? Could be just a support that you was a member of the Nazi party, nothing else. But something nobody would talk about. So therefore, we don't have any kind of information. There is no story about this aspect. You know, it's just now we want to do the research. Actually, we are working, as I said, together with the University of Vilniaus on this project, because it's very interesting to see about why is the shame. Maybe you just have paid some membership fee, but it is almost in the public understanding. It's the same as if you have supported actively the Germans and maybe told them secrets which led to that your people were killed. So there is no differentiation between something which was not harmful and something which was very harmful, because nobody talks about it. And as long as you don't have a closer look at it, you won't get any possibility to say, okay, this was actually not so bad, but this was bad and he was punished and he had to go to jail. So there is no story yet. So we hope we will have a story sometime.
So you're creating a story.
Yeah, okay, you can say it like that. Yeah.
Okay. Kostas, please, your question.
Well, thank you so much. So this has been really very inspiring and thought-provoking, and yeah, heavy also, because these stories, as Donata says, are not stories of one country. In every country you find similar stories. So I was reflecting on this, and I was reflecting on what are the authorized discourses and the interventions that one might have on these issues. And there's several templates. Perhaps the original template is the Holocaust original template of dealing with these issues of people who are involved in crimes, collaborators, onlookers, and it works like that with the trials and the hunting of the Nazis and this kind of thing, but also the various prizes that and recognition of the righteous among nations, etc., etc. And then the second one that I can think of is truth and reconciliation, which is very much the Nelson Mandela paradigm, which is different. I mean, it's more symmetric in a way. It says, okay, let's come out with it. Let's have perpetrators and people who were involved in apartheid together with people who were victims and to talk to each other. Probably closest to the Habermasian sort of idea that you also exposed. And there's others as well. I mean, that's what we see today, and we see it very, very much in North America in issues that have to do with this kind of justice that is wants to bring back somehow roll back the injustices of the past. You know, you get it very, very much in discourses about First Nations today, which is more like quite not at all like the Habermasian contemplative model is more like an agonistic model, the idea that we should sort of take back what is ours in a way. And this is how it's played now, with public recognition of guilt of the white settlers in North America, etc., etc. And then you get others, like, for instance, I'm thinking of peace in Poland and the official position towards complicity to the Holocaust in Poland, which is, it's easy to single them out, obviously, but you can find it in every country as well. My native Greece is not much better in a way. Lithuania is not much better either in coming out to the stories with earnesty. So I was wondering, in light also of the personal weight and the emotional weight that this brings to the families, to descendants, sometimes to the very same people that might still, some of them may be alive very, very old age, you know, how can we navigate this terrain in terms of authorized and official policies? What are the interventions that one might do in order really to produce some kind of terrain in which we can move forward? Because at the end of the day, in a post-trauma situation, moving forward is the important thing. When we have victims, when we have also people who were just there and didn't do anything, people who did something, and people were entangled in many ways in these public stories and in the stories of wars, as you were just saying. So what is there to do between all these different...
Yeah, is your question, what could we do, researchers, museum employees, or is your question, what could the politicians do? What is the official...
Yeah. I was talking about the authorized discourses that come from the states as well, because in some cases, I mean, museums are certainly at arm's length, but if you take, for instance, the way in which the Second World War is, and you know what happened there, and the complexity of what happened there is reduced in Lithuania between the two museums, the certainly larger Museum of Genocide on the one side, and the smaller and less visited Jewish Museum of the Holocaust on the other side.
Yeah.
Well, it's not really, yeah.
Thank you for a very good question. It's a little bit idealistic to answer, as I'm going to do now, because now I'm really on the overview, and that says that there must be room that these stories are shared. There must be officially allowance. It sounds weird, but it must be accepted by the politicians, by the official stakeholders, that these stories come forward, and that demands a kind of political atmosphere where you allow a diversity of voices. And I'm a little bit careful to say it because you and I know, and everyone in this session knows, that there are some European countries, especially in Eastern Europe, which do not allow a diversity of voices. Meaning that there are national, also in Germany somewhere, but not in this, on this level, there are there are some voices that are not accepted because one wants to focus on stories which support a political kind of outer picture about the country we are in. And in that kind of atmosphere, the people who had something to share and who are owning these tough stories, which are important parts of our joint history, they won't talk. And of course, you can't make them talk because it's dangerous for them to talk. 2022, and there are some countries in Europe where you can't tell your own experiences of genocide, of experiences of war and migration, and I would never ask people to share their stories if it's dangerous for them, you know. And there we are back to so one thing is idealistic wish from my side, a kind of dream, Christmas and Easter all together, wish that that there would be an allowance for everyone to tell their own story without shutting them down because their story doesn't fit in our joint understanding or common understanding of our history, picture of history of our own country. But for us museum employees, it's also does to go down at many levels here. It means that we, for example, would never ask someone to share their story if we don't know that they are ready to do so. So meaning in Norway, for example, we had this advertisement in the newspaper just simply because you can't go to someone and say, tell us your traumatic story. Even if it was allowed in Norway, Norway supports, so we are very lucky, Norway supports that all stories can be heard, and you can criticize the state and you can criticize the politicians officially and openly. But even then, you are afraid for the reactions of the local societies. So I, as a museum professional, would never ask someone to share a traumatic experience because the consequences are too big personally in Norway, afraid for the local societies, and in other countries, even political. I don't know if I answered your questions. We could talk extensively about this, but these stories, which I only shared a few of, and I know our partners in the University of Vilniaus in Lithuania have worked with, these are so tough stories. They are so profound. They do so much to your personal identity. You have to have a safe space to share them, really is. And there are many people who are responsible for creating these safe spaces.
Yeah,
and,
I think that's a great point, actually. And on the ethics of research as well, I mean, it's a more general issue as well. And as we know, and this is something also that affects the way in which we shape our research protocols with regard to the stories that we will hear, is really that your responsibility is not really ending with informed consent. You have an independent responsibility of protecting your interviewees from harm and risk, and that means that they might even hold opinions that are unpopular or something, and it should be our responsibility as sharers of these stories to how we share them in order to not to endanger those who express them in a way. But I think the main point that I take as well is your idea about the role of the museum as a safe space, and I think that's an important idea. I mean, this really resonates very, very much with this notion of the contact zone that Jim Clifford has advanced, the museum as contact zone, a place where communities, different views can come into an equitable ground, and a ground in which they can communicate openly and safely, for one thing. But as I gather, I mean, that this is one recommendation that I guess you are offering, that perhaps we need to be a little more tolerant to the individual experiences of people, and not to subscribe to this view of just passing judgment. So such a wholesale way in which sometimes collectivities and collective memory, the way that it becomes authorized, does. So I think it's also a museological argument. I think that it's an important argument of the role of museums vis-a-vis those authorized discourses as well. And something that you as a museum professional, as every museum professional, is struggling with every day as you navigate everyone in the field, this relationship between the state and the funders of the museum, and the community, and the mission.
You're totally right.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised, but I have one more question. I would like to touch the cultural heritage part. When I was visiting Oslo for the first time, I can't remember the concrete building, but I saw the big gate with inclusions of swastikas in the gate, and I thought, oh my God, how can this be happening in the capital of Norway? Why are those swastikas here? But after listening to your talk, and also thinking that the German occupation took like for a few or 3 or 4 decades, yes, in Norway. So it definitely left marks, like material things there. And how do people in Norway react to those things? Are those relics of the occupation considered as heritage objects because it's quite old? If you say it if you see it from the one hand, on the other hand, it's a dissonant things. They're always about discussions and angry thoughts, or maybe some really even vandalism acts or something like that. So how do people treat heritage, if I could say so, from this period?
Yeah, it's a little bit, there is a large variety, so I just have to take it a little bit point for point. For the first thing, you have a lot of collectors, okay? So if you have relictants from the German soldiers, if it's uniform, if it's vehicles, if it's papers, and you are a collector, there is a big market for people who are really interested in these kind of stuff. This is besides museums. When it comes to museums, we have, of course, quite some exhibitions and objects, cultural heritage related to, for example, the Germans who burned down northern Norway. There are exhibitions about that, showing the uniforms, all this kind of stuff. And there is also a lot of military historians working with bunkers and all these kind of military buildings, which were built to defend the German occupants from others who wanted to come to Norway. So they are looked at as relicts from a time which you take good care of, actually. So I would say that there is no one who says we don't talk about it, we don't want to see these objects. There's nothing like that. But of course, if you have been a person who supported the German in a very bad way and you are regarded to be a traitor, there are, for example, changes. Your name could not be the name of a street. They would change it now because you have been the one who supported the Germans, so they take away your name and they put a neutral name somewhere. So you don't see something like taking down statues and all this kind of stuff, but there might be protests that those who have supported the Germans too much get too much attention, if I can say it like that, if it's a, yeah. So in a little, just the last thing, in a very little town in southern Norway where I live, there was Knut Hamsun, who was a poet and he got the Nobel Prize in Literature. He was raised here, or he lived here, and only 15 years ago there was huge demonstrations that he should get a statue somewhere in Grimstad, because this little Norwegian town does not want to have anything to do with the Nazis, and Hamsun was supporting the Nazis. So it doesn't matter if he's a Nobel Prize winner, it doesn't matter how many books he has written. If he supported the Nazis, no statue. Okay, so that's just a small example. But I see Neringa, who knows as much as I do about this, wants to say something.
Neringa, please. Neringa, we can't hear you. Okay, since we can't hear you, Neringa, so maybe you can write your question or comment in the chat. That would be easier. So I just want to say that obviously we are all dealing with the similar situations, because we had lectures about Greece, about Croatia, and now Norway. And there's always the same issues, which are also here in Lithuania, about the objects from the periods from the difficult historical periods, which are now really under the discussion. I'm not sure how these discussions will turn after news which we had today, because I believe that those discussions will raise much more, and they will be much more edgy, if I could say so, after today's thing. So, okay, maybe some other questions or marks, or maybe...
I think Neringa's question is in the chat, actually.
Oh, okay. Neringa wanted to ask about the reactions of the visitors of the exhibition which you presented.
Until now, the exhibition opened just 2 weeks ago, but I have started to have some lectures about this topic. Also in northern Norway, where the Germans burnt it down, which is quite special because I'm a German myself, as I said, and that can come back to me. But for now, all reactions from the visitors and from the people who joined the events was basically finally somebody talks about this. Finally, we can talk about this. Finally, it's possible to say something, because people were really, it was a heavy weight that you always knew something was there in your families, in the societies, and nobody talks about it. So for now, the reactions of the visitors is very good, especially of this exhibition catalog, which, by the way, also is for free available for everyone who wants, where we sum up the stories, because you get an insight in how the other people have experienced the long-term consequences of the Second World War. So for now, the reactions of the visitors is very positive, and many came to us and said, I have a same story. Can I talk to you? And we have actually not the capacity to follow up everyone, which also is an ethical issue, but we don't have time to discuss it right now.
I just wanted also to react that it was very interesting seminar, very interesting, but it was very hard to listen to it because of the today's events. So it was the day that happened today, the day that happened this event is so what happened in Ukraine and what happened in the seminar, it is so connected. I mean, it is so hard to listen. I was even crying some stories. So it was very interesting seminar. Thank you for your work. Thank you very much. Just the reaction.
Thank you very much. I just have to say I had at least 1 hour this morning when I saw everything happening in the Ukraine, where I actually started to cry, because we can see the consequences. We know what the people are experiencing, and humans just don't learn, and it hurts so much. So I can understand totally where you are, and I'm very happy. I'm glad for everyone who works with these tough issues, because it's also personal so tough. So Neringa was just writing these kind words in the chat, but she did a fantastic job in Lithuania working with these issues related to the Holocaust, and it was so tough. So it's the same all over again. War, it's terrible. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much.
Can I go on another story? But Neringa, I mean, yes. What can I say? I mean, we're all glued into this today and all devastated. And if we think of devastation also on the ground and what human stories is going to be generated by this and suffering, it's very, very hard to think about it. But I was thinking, going back to the interviews, and did people come up with stories or with ideas, not just stories, but also reflections on those that helped, all those that understood, and those that didn't understand, among the environment, relationships with others, other people around the story, because clearly the focus for many people would be the grandfather, the grandmother, myself, my partner, my love, or something like that. But then again, there were others around, the supporting family or the harsh family. The neighbors that were like this and the neighbors that were like that. Were there aspects like that came through the... Yeah,
there were many aspects. There are several levels here. So one level is, of course, that as you mentioned now, and as I mentioned before, that it was important that the local society supported you. It was important that you had at least some family who supported you and not throw you out of the house, which some of our informants experienced. So, of course, your loved ones, those who are closest, how do they react? How does the local society react? This were maybe the most important aspects. And then we saw also, this is a different level, our Slovenian partner, they did a great experiment, but they developed workshops for the people who have been their informants. And all of these people had experienced somehow the same, but they didn't know each other. Everyone was for itself, and they collected them to groups, workshops with them, and developed the exhibition together with them. And for the people, as I understood it, for those informants who for the first time met others in the same situation, And then you started to talk with each other and you got a totally new understanding. So one level is that you have your close family and maybe the local society, hopefully on your side, otherwise it's very bad. But you feel also alone there is no group surrounding you having the same experiences. But in Slovenia, they managed to gather people with the same experience to a group, and they started talking with each other about the same experience. It's like a kind of interest community, and that is very helpful. And I know that also from Germany. As I said, I'm German, and I'm also the grandchild of people who had to flee. And in Germany, there are several groups of grandchildren of survivors and children of survivors, not children, but grandchildren who talk together. And this is very valuable for very many people, because you can say, oh, I have the same feelings. Is it in your case also that? So suddenly see you are not alone. And that is very valuable for many. I don't know if it was an answer for you, but yeah. There are many things one could do to help those who feel totally alone. But the most important thing, and that is, I think, also important for us today, again, to think that we are fellow human beings. So not to look down on other human beings, not to just to understand that they could have so much more in the baggage and so much more in their background. Just respect them for them, those they are, with all their stories. Listen if they want to talk. All these basic human things, which are so easy to forget in a busy everyday life. There are so many tough stories out there. Yes.
Okay, no more hands raised, no more reflections. Thank you, Kathrin, very much for your lecture. It is indeed some kind of irony what happened today and what we planned and what the world plans, or not the world, but other crazy people in the world. What are their plans? But let's hope that we'll be okay, that we will be safe, and let's trust and count on each other, because we're all together in this world and in this war also. I would like to end the seminar now. I would like to mention that we have the recording of the seminar, and it will be placed on YouTube channel of Vilniaus University Faculty of Communication. So if you would like to see it or hear it one more time or share, so feel free to do that. We are also having upcoming seminars on difficult heritage, identity building, and transforming themes in next few months. So please follow our Facebook account, our faculty's Facebook account, and you will get the information about the upcoming lectures, which will be also very interesting and also very up to date. What is with the things that are happening now. So thank you, everybody. Be safe, and hope to see you after a month. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.